A war in Europe and record tension from China's behaviour in Asia. Warnings the global order is on the cusp of being overturned. This is World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey. Joining me today is former Armed Forces Minister James Heappey. James, thank you for joining me. We've heard from the current Secretary of State for Defence that we're living in a pre-war world. Are you concerned the world order as we know it is about to be overturned, or is at risk of being overturned?
Yes, I think that China, Russia, Iran, to a lesser degree North Korea, because they don't act so overtly on the sort of global stage, but China, Russia, Iran definitely make a very overt challenge to the current rules-based international system. They believe it to be a system that was crafted in the Western interest and that needs to be overturned. And they try to rally a whole load of powers that traditionally are kind of non-aligned and consider themselves to be the kind of rising powers in the world to sort of rally in behind them and say, we're going to turn this over. Now, some of that is a diplomatic effort. It's about votes in the UN, votes in the World Bank, votes in the IMF. That's one thing. And that competition does require the UK, the US, France, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the EU, to be competing politically, economically, through trade all the time. But it's also a military challenge. And I think it is really important that the Western defence industrial base, so our industry, is given the encouragement to grow so that our capacity to manufacture matches that of China, Iran, Russia and North Korea. I think that from that comes a hard power deterrent that says to those countries, we will compete with them on politics and economics, we'll compete with them on trade, we'll compete with them over how the international order should be governed, but we've also got the hard power ready to stand up to them if they make the stupid decision of turning that competition into a war. Much better that this competition plays out over this century as a diplomatic, political, economic competition than as a military one.
Are you concerned that this competition could spiral into a hot war?
Look, there's all sorts of people who have written very eloquently about the risk of an accidental war triggered over the Taiwan Strait, that the sort of the build-up of military mass on continental China and in the first and second island chain brings with it this risk of miscalculation that sparks something, and clearly that would be catastrophic. And there are some really good people in America and in Australia, Japan, Korea, Singapore, who think about this stuff all the time. And I think the Chinese are acutely aware of it too. I know that we see some quite belligerent actions taken by the Chinese around some of the contested islands and atolls in the South China Sea. But I think fundamentally they understand the risk of an accidental confrontation. But if China thinks it can retake Taiwan without consequence, if China thinks that the US and its allies can't break in to the first and second island chain, and therefore they can complete the taking of Taiwan before a Western military response can be generated, then I think Xi would do so. And that's why it's really important that the West, whilst aiming for a political and economic competition, mobilises its industry so that the hard power deterrent is there too.
Would the UK be part of that conflict?
Yes, has to be. And it has to be part of it for two reasons. Firstly, that we've got a big NATO summit coming up in Washington in 4 weeks' time, with the Republican National Convention the week later and a Trump presidential campaign in full flight. It's really important that the big European powers who trade extensively with Southeast Asia, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, that we show ourselves to be engaged in Indo-Pacific security, because we have a responsibility there too. And in return, the US remains engaged in Euro-Atlantic security. That's the first thing. The second thing is the UK has a massive interest in that region that justifies us being there on our own merits. And yes, we must be ready to sort of be part of that deterrence in the South China Sea, in the first and second island chain. But actually what we should also be doing, as we are, we've got 2 warships permanently east of Suez, just doing low-level stuff alongside small island nations or developing countries, coastal states in Africa, Southeast Asia, the South Pacific. A lot of stuff like countering illegal fishing, which is an egregious challenge to food security of a lot of these countries. Mostly it's Chinese illegal fishing. And so by being there with these offshore patrol vessels on the other side of the world, the other week, I think it was HMS Tamar was in Tonga, had a Tongan law enforcement officer embarked. And so she was able to go around and challenge some of these illegal fishing operations. And that just shows our allies in the region where the advance of China is huge, and it's a very seductive advance. It comes with offers of debt in order to build airports and ports. It comes with offers of free healthcare, just showing that we're still engaged. So too is France, so is America. Obviously, Australia and New Zealand do a heck of a lot of heavy lifting in the South Pacific. That just helps to push back. People, I think, want to be the friend of the West. They recognize our values more than they share China's. But if the Chinese offer is too good and we have nothing in return, of course they stray there. So we've got to service that chronic competition as well as being ready for the acute challenge in the first and second island chain.
But James, 2 warships east of Suez. I think it was you told me that China is adding, its navy is growing. It's adding something the equivalent to the French Navy every year, or it's certainly growing at an enormously fast and substantial rate. What would you say to those who say, hang on a minute, 2 British warships, token effort, thanks for coming, but actually we're struggling as it is with our armed forces to perform our core role in terms of contributing to NATO's defence of the Euro-Atlantic area. What would you say to those people who say that Britain must focus here and can't really make a difference in the Pacific?
Well, I think you get right to the crux of the key strategic question for the UK. And actually, this was one of the few areas where there's been real blue water between the Conservative and the Labour Party over the last 5 years. Labour have sort of said we need to double down on our ability to act within the Euro-Atlantic as part of NATO. We've been saying, there's a sort of global Britain, we've got responsibilities beyond. My sense is that Labour have kind of seen that the US-UK politics do require the UK to be a sort of leader within Europe in driving people to recognise their role in Indo-Pacific security too. And therefore, you can't make the choice between theatres. Clearly, geography dictates that the balance of your effort is in the Euro-Atlantic. You've got to be engaged in the Indo-Pacific. Then the other key part of the debate is whether your force is optimised to fight, held at contingency to fight, or whether it is out there operating as part of the constant global competition. The reality is that isn't a choice because the competition is every day, so you've got to be out there competing. That's what these offshore patrol vessels do so well, and in time, Type 31 frigates will do so well. It's what dozens of small army training teams go out around the world doing every month, which we don't make enough of, by the way. So we've got to be able to do that, whilst at the same time know that we can pull all that stuff back in, re-aggregate it, and have the war-fighting force that might be needed, probably in Europe, but possibly in extremis in the Pacific too.
My final question, do you imagine that you and I will live to see this world order overturned, or do you think the order as we know it is something that can be defended and sustained?
No, I'm certain that it's possible to see it overturned in our lifetime. I'm absolutely certain of it. Now that's not, if you'd asked me, is World War III inevitable, I'd have said no, definitely not. I do think the Secretary of State is right to focus people's minds on this being a pre-war period because all of the geopolitical indicators are trending in the wrong direction. But you asked me the more macro question about can I see a world order being overturned within the next generation? Absolutely I can. Unless the West figures out what it offers to the world, figures out, that there's a set of values that we prize and that we're ready to champion. That there's an economic force within the West that we can mobilise to rival the insidious debt that China offers to developing countries all over the world. The West has so much to offer, and yet we spend so much time beating ourselves up about our history and fighting over actually relatively irrelevant things within our domestic politics, that we vacate the international stage and allow Russia and China to say, look at them all squabbling amongst themselves over silly stuff, whilst at the same time running international affairs in a way that kind of suits them, but they don't really know what they stand for anymore. Come with us. we've got to find our mojo and be ready for this competition, because if we're not, without a shot being fired, we will find that the entire rules-based international system is changed, and it won't be changed in our interests.
James, alarming predictions, but thank you very much for joining me on World at War. I'm Jerome Starkey, the Sun's defence editor, and if you're watching this on YouTube and you have any questions, please ask them in the comments below, and we will do our best to answer some of them next time.